The cold December air bit through the darkness at John F. Kennedy Airport. Most of New York City slept, but in the big cargo area of JFK. The night shift kept working, inside Building 261. The Lufthansa Airlines cargo terminal. A few workers did their normal jobs, not knowing that very soon their normal Monday morning would become part of crime history. At about 3:12 in the morning, a black Ford Econoline van backed up to the delivery door. 6 men came out, their faces hidden by ski masks. Their hands holding loaded guns, they moved with smooth skill, cutting through the chain-link fence with bolt cutters like they had done it 100 times before. In about 64 minutes, they would leave with $5 million in cash. That could not be traced, and $875,000 in jewelry. The biggest cash robbery in American history at that time. But the money they stole that cold morning would become a death sentence. By the end of 1979, at least 11 people linked to the robbery would be dead or missing. Their bodies spread across New York or never found at all. The mastermind would carefully kill almost everyone involved, driven by fear and greed. What seemed like the perfect crime would turn into a perfect nightmare, showing that in the world of organized crime, even success can be deadly. This is the story of the Lufthansa Heist, where $6 million in stolen cash and jewels could not buy safety, where loyalty meant nothing, and where the only man who lived to tell the story did so by betraying everyone he knew. It is a story of ambition, violence, stupidity, and the harsh math of crime when the prize is big enough. Witnesses become problems, and problems get buried. Before we dive deep into this amazing true story, I want to know where in the world you are watching from. What time is it for you right now? Are you relaxing for bed, letting this story carry you into sleep? Or maybe you are just starting your day, looking for something interesting to listen to while you work. If you love true crime and gangster history, hit that subscribe button right now. Give this video a like if you are ready for one of the most fascinating heist stories ever told. Share it with someone who likes a good gangster tale. Trust me, this one is unforgettable. The Lufthansa Heist has everything: brilliant planning, shocking stupidity, brutal murders, and a trail of bodies that reads like a mob hit list. Now let me take you back to where it all began. Not to that December morning in 1978, but years earlier, to the streets of New York, where the people in this story were shaped by violence, poverty, and the exciting pull of organized crime. To understand the Lufthansa Heist, you have to understand New York City in the 1970s. This was not the clean, tourist-friendly Manhattan of today. This was a city on its knees, almost broke, where whole neighborhoods were war zones, and the mob worked with almost no fear. The money crisis of 1975 had brought the city down. Crime was everywhere. Times Square was a mess of bad movies, illegal activity, and violence. Graffiti covered every subway car. Buildings burned in the Bronx while landlords collected insurance money. The blackout of 1977 had caused wide looting across the city. Police were overloaded and often corrupt in this place. Organized crime did not just survive, it grew. The 5 families of the New York Mafia: Gambino, Lucchese, Genovese, Colombo, and Bonanno, controlled everything from building work and trash collection to drugs and gambling. At JFK Airport, which had been renamed from Idlewild in 1963, the mob had made a criminal paradise. Hijacking trucks full of goods had become so normal that some drivers actually hoped to be hit by certain crews because they treated their victims well, slipping them cash for cooperation. This was the world where our story happens. A world where a young man could make more money in one day, stealing trucks, than his father could make in a month working an honest job. It was a world where violence was money, where loyalty was tested all the time, and where the results of failure or betrayal were measured in bullets. The Lucchese crime family was one of the smaller of the 5 families. But what it lacked in size, it made up for in smart planning and cruelty. Named after Thomas Three Finger Brown Lucchese, who died in 1967, the family had become a well-run criminal machine by the late 1970s. After Lucchese's death, leadership went to Carmine Mr. Gribbs Tremonti, though real power lay with underboss Anthony Tony Ducks Corallo. The family's work covered the waterfront, labor unions, building work, and large criminal businesses at JFK Airport. They had their hands in everything: loan sharking, threats, drug moving. Though officially forbidden, gambling and theft at JFK. The Lucchese family shared area with the Gambino family. The airport was a gold mine. Millions of dollars in goods passed through every day. Electronics, clothes, cigarettes, jewelry, cash for organized crime. It was like having a license to print money. All you needed was inside information, muscle, and the willingness to use violence. The Lucchese family's airport work was run by Capo Paul Vario, working out of a plain pizzeria in Brooklyn. Vario was old-school mafia, tough, smart, and totally cruel. He demanded respect and complete loyalty. Vario was a full-made member and capo in the Lucchese family. But his top helpers, Jimmy Burke and Henry Hill, could never be made because of their Irish background. One of his most useful helpers was a man named James Burke, better known as Jimmy the Gent. James Burke was born on July 5, 1931, in New York City. Originally named James Conway, he never knew his father. His Irish mother, Jane Conway, put him in foster care when he was just 2 years old. The story of Jimmy Burke's childhood reads like a plan for creating a person without care for others. He was moved from foster home to foster home, orphanage to orphanage. Some families treated him kindly. Others hurt him physically. The hurt was constant and shaped him at 13. Burke was in the backseat of a car when his foster father turned around to hit him for some small mistake. The man lost control of the car, crashed, and died right away. The foster mother blamed young Jimmy for her husband's death and beat him regularly until he was taken from her care. Between the ages of 16 and 22, Burke spent all but 86 days behind bars, in reform schools, juvenile detention centers, and finally adult prisons. He learned quickly that in the prison system, violence and loyalty to the mob earned respect. During one time, sentenced to 5 years for passing bad checks, Burke kept his mouth shut about his helpers despite savage beatings from police. This earned him respect from made men in prison. Inside, Burke found his calling. He did murders for mob bosses, making strong connections with the Lucchese and Colombo families. When he was finally let out, he threw himself into organized crime with the passion of a man who had found his true job. Eventually, the Burke family of Rockaway, Queens, adopted him. They gave him stability and love. And even after he became a famous criminal, Burke visited them regularly and sent them money. It was one of the few shows of real care in his otherwise violent life. Burke earned the nickname Jimmy the Gent for his outwardly charming personality and his habit of tipping well, opening doors for the bartenders, waiters, and sandwich delivery men who served him at gambling spots and social clubs. He was known for paying an old woman's $5,000 debt when her criminal son refused, then reportedly murdering the son that same day. He could be generous and charming at dinner, then blow someone's brains out for dessert. But under the charm lay a man of shocking violence in 1962. When Burke was planning to marry his fiancée Mickey, her ex-boyfriend began following her, calling constantly, shouting at her on the sidewalk, driving by the house over and over on the wedding day. Police found the ex-boyfriend's body in his car, cut into a dozen pieces. Henry Hill, who would later become an FBI informant, described Burke's thinking simply: Jimmy loved to steal. He ate and breathed it. I think if you ever offered Jimmy $1 billion not to steal, he'd turn you down and then try to figure out how to steal it from you. It was the only thing he enjoyed. It kept him alive. Burke's specialty became hijacking trucks at JFK Airport. He made an elegant system if he did not know a truck driver. He would take their driver's license so they would know he knew where they lived. But he would also slip a $50 bill into the wallet, which was about a week's pay in the 1970s. Drivers actually hoped to be hijacked by Burke because he treated them so well. Even when police assigned officers specifically to stop Burke's work, he simply bribed them into becoming partners. Burke ran his crew out of a bar called Robert's Lounge in South Ozone Park, Queens. The bar was supposedly the burial site of more than a dozen mob victims. It was also where Burke and his crew planned their most daring jobs. Helpers included Henry Hill, a half-Irish, half-Sicilian hustler who could not be made because of his Irish blood, and Tommy DeSimone, a violent person with mental problems who had become famous as the idea for Joe Pesci's character in Goodfellas. According to Hill, Burke was directly responsible for 60 to 70 murders during his criminal career. He had no problem about killing witnesses, informants, fellow criminals, or anyone who became a bother. He would regularly get information from corrupt cops about who was cooperating with authorities, then get rid of them. Hill described it perfectly. Jimmy had a reputation for being wild. He'd whack you, there was no question. Jimmy could shoot you just as fast as shake your hand. At dinner, he could be the nicest guy in the world, but then he could blow you away for dessert. This was the man who would mastermind the Lufthansa Heist. A brilliant criminal planner, a charming person without care for others, and a cruel killer who saw human life as nothing more than a block to be removed when useful. If Jimmy Burke was the brains and muscle of the operation, Henry Hill was the connector, the man who moved between worlds, gathering information and making introductions. Henry Hill Jr. was born on June 11, 1943 in Brownsville, Brooklyn. Unlike Burke, Hill had a stable family. His father was an Irish electrician. His mother was Sicilian. He was one of 9 children. But from his earliest memories, Hill was not interested in the straight life. Across the street from his house was a pizzeria and cab stand run by mobsters. Hill would watch them from his window. The flashy cars, the expensive suits, the respect they commanded. It was there that I belonged, Hill would later write. I was part of something. I belonged. I was treated like a grown-up. Every day was a party. At age 11, Hill walked across the street looking for a part-time job. He began running errands for Paul Vario's crew. His father beat him when he discovered Hill was skipping school. But Hill accepted that this was the price of his chosen life. Soon, the mailman was too scared to deliver truancy reports to the Hill household. Hill was captured by the lifestyle at 16. He was arrested for the first time for selling untaxed cigarettes. A mob lawyer got him released, and the crew celebrated him, breaking his cherry, proving his loyalty by keeping his mouth shut. This cemented Hill's identity. He would later describe the intoxication of mob life. It's an intoxicating lifestyle that sucks you in. Then you get too scared and too in love with the money to leave. All people do is fear you, and that's intoxicating. Hill met Jimmy Burke in 1956 while serving drinks at a card game. He was dazzled by Burke's generous tipping. Burke took Hill under his wing. Seeing his intelligence and hunger, they became close helpers, bonded by their shared Irish blood that prevented them from ever becoming made men. Hill's criminal record grew quickly. He did arson, ran stolen car rings, and took part in truck hijackings. In 1965, he was drafted into the 82nd Airborne Division, but found ways to continue his criminal activities, even in the military. He returned to New York in 1963 and married Karen Friedman, who at first did not get along with him, but eventually became aware of and helping in his criminal lifestyle. She would even hide the gun he used to pistol whip a man who tried to attack her. On April 7, 1967, Hill and DeSimone took part in the Air France robbery at JFK, stealing $420,000 without firing a shot. Hill used his share to buy the suite lounge in Queens and to pay for a showy lifestyle. The Copacabana on Friday nights with his wife, Saturdays with his girlfriends, new suits, and obvious spending. But Hill's greatest addition to criminal history would be his role in the Lufthansa Heist. He would be the go-between for the insider, who had information about the money, and Jimmy Burke, who had the crew to steal it. If there was a person in this story who showed pure, uncontrolled violence, it was Tommy DeSimone, born on May 24, 1950 in Cambridge, Massachusetts. DeSimone grew up in a family deep in organized crime. His father's father, Rosario DeSimone, had been boss of the Los Angeles crime family. His uncle, Frank DeSimone, was a criminal lawyer turned mobster. From childhood, Tommy was different. His sister described him as having a short temper and an animal-like hunger. He would drink almost a gallon of whole milk a day. His only other childhood hobby was collecting different kinds of pocket knives that he kept in an old cigar box under his bed. When playing darts, if Tommy started losing, he would throw the darts at other players. He lifted weights without stop, smoked constantly, and beat a punching bag that he kept in a spare room. Even among criminals known for violence, Tommy stood out. He joined Paul Vario's crew in 1965 at age 15. Henry Hill, 10 years older, described their first meeting. Jimmy came by the cab stand one day with a skinny kid who was wearing a wise guy suit and a pencil mustache. It was Tommy DeSimone. He was one of those kids who looked younger than he was, just because he was trying to look older. Hill would later describe Tommy as a pure person with mental problems who was always high on cocaine. At 17, Tommy did his first murder, shooting a random stranger named Howard Goldstein as he walked down the street when Hill said, "That was cold-blooded." "Tommy," DeSimone replied simply, "Well, I'm a mean cat." Tommy always carried his gun in a brown paper bag during hijackings. He was known for his hair-trigger temper and willingness to kill over the smallest scene insult in one famous event at a bar. Tommy shot a young man named Michael Spider Janko in the foot for not serving drinks fast enough. A week later, when Spider talked back to him, Tommy shot him dead. Jimmy Burke, furious at the needless murder, forced Tommy to dig the hole himself to bury the body. In 1970, DeSimone did the murder that would seal his fate. During a welcome home party at Robert's Lounge for a Gambino-made man named William Billy Batts Bentvina, Batts jokingly asked Tommy if he still shined shoes. It was a reference to Tommy's youth when he had worked as a shoe-shine boy. Tommy took it as a deadly insult. Tommy, Burke, and Hill beat Batts senseless, wrapped him in a tablecloth, threw him in a trunk, and drove him upstate during the drive. They heard noises from the trunk. Batts was still alive. They stopped the car, opened the trunk, and Tommy stabbed him over and over while Burke shot him. They buried him by the side of a road later. When real estate builders began work on that land, Burke ordered Hill and DeSimone to dig up the body and get rid of it elsewhere. According to Hill, Batts's body finally wound up in a car crusher at a New Jersey junkyard. The murder of a made man without permission was a death sentence in mob law. But Tommy did not know it at the time. He also killed Ronald Foxy Jareth, a student of John Gotti, for threatening him. Tommy was living on borrowed time, but in December 1978, he had one more big score to pull off. Paul Vario was the capo, the captain who watched over the airport work. Born in 1914, Vario was old-school mafia, having come up through the ranks during the 1940s and 50s. He ran his work out of his son Tuddy's Pizzeria in Brooklyn, a simple front for a multi-million-dollar criminal business. Vario was careful, methodical, and totally cruel. He demanded respect and complete obedience. Helpers paid him tribute from every job. Every score, in return, he gave protection, connections, and the backing of the Lucchese family. By 1978, Vario had a problem. He had lost a shipment of cocaine to authorities and needed cash fast. When the chance came to hear about the Lufthansa cargo terminal and the cash held there, Vario gave his blessing for Burke to move ahead. It was a decision that would start a waterfall of murders and finally lead to Vario's own downfall when Henry Hill became an informant. Every great heist needs an inside man, and the Lufthansa job had two. Louis Werner was a cargo boss for Lufthansa Airlines at JFK. He was in his 40s, married with children, and drowning in gambling debts. Werner owed $20,000 to loan sharks, equal to over $100,000 in today's money. That kind of debt to the mob was a death sentence if you could not pay. Werner worked in Building 261, the Lufthansa cargo place. He had inside knowledge that was pure gold for criminals once a month. Lufthansa flew in huge amounts of American money from West Germany. American soldiers and tourists would exchange their dollars for Deutschmarks while in Germany, and those dollars had to be flown back to the United States. The cash would arrive over the weekend and sit in the Lufthansa vault until Monday morning when armored cars picked it up for deposit in banks. The cash was untraceable. No serial numbers were recorded. It was as close to a perfect target as existed in the criminal world. Werner knew the schedule. He knew the security systems. He knew exactly when the shipments arrived and how long they would be weak. He knew that the alarm system used a double-door setup, where one door had to be closed before the other could be opened or the alarm would sound. He knew where the money was kept, how it was packed, and even where the crew could park during the heist. Werner had another advantage. He had done it before, in 1976. Werner and his co-worker, Peter Grunwald, had successfully stolen $22,000 in foreign money from Lufthansa. They got away with it. This gave Werner confidence that a much bigger job was possible. But Werner was not connected to the mob directly. He needed a middleman. Someone who could put together a crew able to pull off a multi-million-dollar robbery. He went to Martin Krugman. Martin Krugman, nicknamed Marty, ran a wig shop in Queens and was a small-time bookmaker. Werner owed Krugman $20,000 in gambling debts. Desperate, Werner approached Krugman with an offer. "Forget the debt, and I will tell you about $6 million in untraceable cash sitting in a vault at JFK." Ready for the taking, Krugman was interested. But smart enough to know he could not pull off a job this big himself. He needed real criminals. Men with experience in armed robbery and the willingness to use violence. Krugman knew Henry Hill from the neighborhood. Hill was linked to Jimmy Burke, one of the most successful and cruel hijackers in New York. Krugman went to Hill. Hill saw immediately that this was possibly the biggest score of his career. But there was a problem. Krugman and Burke had bad feelings between them. Burke did not trust Krugman and thought him a talker, someone who could not keep his mouth shut. Hill smoothed things over, stressing the chance. Burke was interested. The size of the possible take was huge. Werner guessed at least $2 million in cash plus jewelry for Burke. This was a chance at the kind of score criminals dream about their whole lives. He began planning right away. Parnell Stacks Edwards, nicknamed Stacks for his skill at organizing stolen goods, was a black helper of Burke's crew. He was not a full member of the operation, but was trusted enough to be given an important job: getting rid of the getaway vehicles after the heist. Edwards was shown in the film Goodfellas by Samuel L. Jackson in a memorable cameo. In real life, Edwards was skilled, but likely to let drugs and alcohol mess with his thinking. This character flaw would prove deadly. His one job after the heist was simple: take the van to a junkyard owned by mobster John Gotti, where it would be crushed and destroyed along with any evidence. That was it. One task, foolproof. Edwards would fail amazingly, and it would cost him his life just 7 days after the heist. Burke handpicked his crew for the Lufthansa job. Each man had specific skills and connections. Angelo Seep was a seasoned criminal who had worked with Burke on earlier hijackings. He was reliable and cruel, Louis Roast Beef Cafora. Weighing in at over 300 pounds, was another Burke helper known for his part in planning and doing robberies. He was also given the job of cleaning some of the heist money. Joe Buddha Manry earned his nickname from his large belly. He worked for Air France at JFK and had inside knowledge of airport security and work. Robert Frenchy McMahon also worked for Air France and had become friends with Hill, who introduced him to Burke. Paolo Licastri, a Gambino soldier close to John Gotti, since the airport was shared area between the Lucchese and Gambino families. Someone from the Gambino side needed to be included to keep peace. Burke's son, Frank, was given the job to drive one of the backup vehicles. This was Frank's chance to prove himself in his father's world. Each person was promised between $10,000 and $50,000. Depending on their part, big sums, though based on the expected take of $2 million. No one yet knew that the actual take would be nearly 3 times that amount. And no one knew that most of them would never spend a penny of it. The planning for the Lufthansa heist took months. Burke was very careful. He insisted on understanding every detail. The layout of the building, the security systems, the schedules of workers, the timing of deliveries, the routes to and from the place, backup plans for every possible problem. Werner gave detailed information. He drew pictures of the cargo place. He explained the double-door alarm system. He told Burke exactly where the vault was located and how the cash was packed in boxes, weighing about 40 pounds each. He explained that the weekend shipment sat in the vault from Saturday afternoon through Monday morning, giving the crew a large window of chance. Werner even worked out where the crew could park during the heist without raising suspicion. Burke did watching. His crew drove past the place over and over, timing the movements of workers, noting the positions of security cameras. Finding weaknesses in the fence edge, they studied the airport security presence, learning when and where Port Authority police patrolled. Burke decided the heist would take place on a Monday morning. In the early hours when the smallest number of workers would be present, the crew would need to move fast. Get in, control the workers, open the vault, load the money, and get out. Speed and violence would be their advantages. Burke got weapons, handguns, and shotguns. He got a van, ski masks, gloves, and bolt cutters for the fence. He planned the getaway route and set up multiple vehicles after the heist. The crew would move the loot at a warehouse owned by John Gotti, a rising captain in the Gambino family. Gotti also offered to have the getaway van crushed at his salvage yard. Everything was planned down to the minute. Werner would call Burke when a large shipment arrived. The crew would get ready right away. They would strike in the early morning hours when tiredness made security guards and workers less alert. On Saturday, December 9th, 1978, Werner called Burke with the news. A large shipment of cash had arrived. Over $5 million, far more than expected. The money would sit in the vault all weekend. By Monday morning, the armored cars would arrive to move it to banks. The window was open. It was time to do it. Burke gathered his crew. He gave final instructions. No needless violence, no talking. Follow the plan exactly. And most importantly, after the heist, everyone must stay quiet. No flashy buys, no talking about the job. No doing anything that would draw attention. These rules would prove impossible for some to follow. Everything was ready. The perfect crime was about to be done. But what Burke and his crew did not know was that their perfect crime had a deadly flaw built into it from the beginning. The flaw was not in the planning or the doing. The flaw was the nature of the men involved, their greed, their pride, their inability to follow simple rules, and most of all Jimmy, Burke's paranoid certainty that the only way to protect himself was to get rid of everyone who could point to him. The Lufthansa heist would succeed amazingly as a robbery, but as a criminal business designed to give wealth and security for its people, It would fail terribly. Nearly everyone involved would be dead within a year. On the evening of December 10th, 1978, the crew gathered for a final briefing. The plan was set. The target was ready in less than 12 hours. They would do the biggest cash robbery in American history. What none of them could guess was that the real danger would not come from the FBI or the NYPD. It would come from each other. The temperature hung just above freezing as the black Ford Econoline van neared Building 261 at JFK Airport. Inside, 6 men, masked, armed, and full of adrenaline, got ready for the high point of months of planning. They were about to do one of the most daring robberies in American history. The driver moved through the nearly empty airport complex. At around 3:12 a.m., the night shift was in full swing. But with very few people, most of the airport slept. The van pulled up to the gate of the Lufthansa cargo place. One of the men climbed out, bolt cutters in hand, and snapped the padlock on the chain link gate. The van drove through. They backed up to the delivery entrance. The crew moved with military exactness, the product of Burke's obsessive planning. They did not have keys. They surprised a worker at the side door, forced him inside at gunpoint, and made the workers let them inside. A night shift was made up of a few workers. The armed men burst into the break room where some workers were having coffee. The workers looked up in shock, staring down the barrels of shotguns and handguns. "Nobody moves, nobody gets hurt," one of the robbers said. The command was calm, almost professional. This was not the crew's first time. The workers were told to lie face down on the ground. Their hands were tied with plastic zip ties and in some cases handcuffs. The robbers herded them all into the lunchroom. The workers were scared but cooperative. These were not security guards or cops. They were cargo handlers and clerks earning small wages. They had no interest in becoming heroes. One robber briefly lifted his mask to see better. Senior cargo agent Kerry Whalen got a quick look at his face and would later tell the FBI the man looked like Tommy DeSimone. Though he was far from sure, the crew's next challenge was getting past the double-door alarm system. Werner had explained how it worked. One door had to be closed before the other could be opened, or alarms would sound and alert Port Authority police. They needed someone who knew the system to open it properly. They grabbed senior boss Rolf Redman at gunpoint and forced him to turn off the alarm system and open the vault under threat of death. They knew from intelligence that if the inner door was open while the outer door stayed open, alarms would go off. Redman was terrified but cooperative. He opened the first door as told, once inside the middle room. They closed the outer door and told Redman to open the inner door to the vault. His hands shaking, Redman obeyed. The door swung open. What they saw went beyond their wildest hopes. The vault was packed with boxes stacked from floor to nearly ceiling. Cardboard containers filled with U.S. money. The shipment that weekend had been even larger than Werner guessed. Instead of $2 million, there's over $5 million in cash, plus dozens of containers filled with jewelry, watches, and other valuables. For a moment, the robbers just stared, then training took over. They began loading boxes into their van. Each container weighed about 40 pounds. They worked in a chain, passing boxes from man to man out of the vault through the building into the waiting van. The workers, still zip-tied in the break room, could hear the activity but could not see what was happening. Some prayed silently, others just waited, hoping to survive. One worker, Kerry Whalen, who handled customs clearance, made the mistake of trying to talk to one of the robbers, explaining his job duties. The robber answered by hitting him in the head with a rifle butt, warning him to shut up. The loading took time. There was simply so much money. Box after box was carried to the van in total. The crew loaded about 72 cartons of cash and jewelry. The work was tiring, but fueled by adrenaline. They were in the middle of pulling off the heist of a lifetime. During the robbery, the crew kept discipline. There was very little talk. No needless violence beyond the rifle butt hit to Whalen. They followed Burke's instructions exactly. Get in, secure the workers, get the money, get out. Clean and professional. At one point, one of the workers needed to use the bathroom. The robbers allowed it, taking him at gunpoint. This small kindness would be remembered later. The robbers were not mean. They were professionals doing a job. They did not want to kill anyone. They just wanted the money. After loading the van to full, the crew got ready to leave. One of the robbers gave a final warning to the workers. Stay on the floor, do not move, do not try to be heroes. Give us 10 minutes and nobody gets hurt. Roughly at 4:16 a.m., 64 minutes after they entered, the crew drove away from the Lufthansa cargo terminal. They had just finished the largest cash robbery in American history. $5 million in untraceable bills and $875,000 in jewelry for a total take of $5,875,000. In today's money changed for inflation, that is over $28 million as they drove through the quiet airport, heading for the pre-arranged meeting point where they would move the money to other vehicles. The crew felt the joy of success. They had done it. The perfect crime. Clean, professional, no one killed within hours. They would divide the money, and each man would have more wealth than he had ever dreamed of. What they did not realize was that they had already made deadly mistakes. The van would be found with fingerprints. Tommy had shown his face to at least one worker. Workers could describe their heights, builds, and voices. The FBI would be on them within days. But even more dangerous than the FBI was the man who planned the heist. Jimmy Burke had already decided that most of them had to die. The crew drove to a warehouse in Canarsie, Brooklyn, owned by John Gotti's crew there. They moved the money and jewelry from the Ford Econoline van to the trunks of other cars. Gotti had also set up for the van to be taken to his salvage yard and crushed, destroying evidence. The sorting and counting began. Boxes were opened, and the reality of their take became clear. They had expected $2 million. They had stolen nearly $6 million. The happiness was tempered by caution. Burke right away reminded everyone of the rules. Nobody spends anything big, Burke instructed. No new cars, no jewelry, no flashy buys. Stay quiet for at least 6 months. Let the heat die down. Anyone who does not follow these rules is putting everyone at risk. The crew nodded. They understood, or at least they said they understood. The split was supposed to be based on the original guess of $2 million. But now there was 3 times that amount. Burke decided to keep the extra for himself, with tribute going to Paul Vario and cuts to John Gotti and small tribute. Cuts also went to Gambino and Bonanno figures who controlled parts of the airport. Werner had been promised roughly $200,000 to $250,000 for the tip. He ended up getting less than half that amount. Others would get their pre-arranged cuts ranging from $10,000 to $50,000. Martin Krugman, as the middleman who brought the tip, expected $500,000. But Burke had different plans. He had no plan to pay out what he promised. The extra money, he decided, would stay with him. And anyone who complained would become a problem that needed solving. For now, though, there was celebration. The crew gathered at Robert's Lounge, Burke's bar in South Ozone Park. They drank, they laughed, they enjoyed their success. They had pulled off the impossible. The newspapers would be calling it the heist of the century. They were legends now. Henry Hill later described the feeling. It was beautiful. For a few hours, we were on top of the world. We just stolen $6 million and nobody got hurt. It was perfect. But perfection in the criminal world is always temporary. At about 6 a.m. on Monday, December 11th, the morning shift began arriving at the Lufthansa cargo terminal. The first workers to arrive noticed something right away wrong. The gate was open, the padlock cut. They came near carefully, inside building 261. They found their co-workers still zip-tied and handcuffed. lying on the floor of the break room. Some had been there for nearly 2 hours. The workers called for help, and within minutes, Port Authority police came down on the scene. The size of the robbery quickly became clear. The vault was empty. Boxes containing millions in cash and jewelry were gone. Bosses frantically checked lists and records. The total came to $5 million in cash and $875,000 in jewelry. $5,875,000 total. The largest cash robbery in American history at that time. The FBI was told right away. Special agents from the New York field office arrived within the hour. This was now a federal case, one of the biggest the Bureau had ever handled. Lead investigators included FBI Special Agent Tom Sweeney, who would give years of his life to solving the case. Witnesses were talked to right away. The workers who had been held during the robbery gave descriptions: 6 men, all wearing ski masks, armed with handguns and shotguns, professional and organized. Very little violence. One worker, Ralph Rebman, mentioned that one of the robbers had briefly removed his mask. Rebman thought he could name the man if shown photographs. Forensic teams swept the building. They found partial fingerprints on some surfaces. They found the cut padlock, the zip ties, shell casings from the guns, though no shots had been fired. The robbers had chambered rounds. They found footprints and fiber evidence outside. Investigators found tire tracks and looked at the fence where the bolt cutters had been used. Every piece of physical evidence was listed and sent to FBI labs for study. By noon, the story had hit the news. RADIO broadcasts announced the heist by evening. It was the lead story on every television news program. The New York Times would run it as a front-page story. Thieves get $58 million in cash and jewels at Kennedy Airport. The media coverage was huge. This was not just a robbery, it was an amazing crime. The kind that caught public imagination. $6 million stolen in barely an hour. No one killed. Professional doing. The public was at the same time horrified and fascinated. For the FBI, the pressure was immediate and strong. This was a black eye for airport security, for the Port Authority, and for federal law enforcement. Director William Webster demanded results. The New York field office made a task force dedicated only to solving the Lufthansa heist. Investigators started with the basics. Who had inside knowledge? Who had access? Who had the ability to pull off such a well-planned operation? Louis Werner's name came up almost right away. FBI investigators began with the logical starting point: Lufthansa workers who had the access, knowledge, and chance to give inside information. The list was short, and Louis Werner was near the top. Background checks showed Werner's money problems. He owed money to bookmakers. He lived beyond his means. He had been at work the night of the heist, but had left early, claiming sickness. Convenient timing. His co-workers reported that Werner had been asking unusual questions about security, steps and shipment schedules in the months before the robbery. But the FBI needed more than suspicion. They needed evidence. They put Werner under watch and began checking his activities and spending. What they discovered would give them their first major break in the case. At the same time, the investigation grew to known criminals with skill in airport heists. Jimmy Burke's name was said over and over by informants. Burke was famous for his JFK work. If there was a major robbery at the airport, Burke was likely involved, but Burke was careful. He had experience avoiding law enforcement. He knew better than to leave evidence. The FBI put him under watch as well, watching Robert's lounge, tracking his movements, checking his known helpers. Henry Hill's name came up. Tommy DeSimone, Angelo Seep, the usual suspects from Burke's crew. The FBI showed photographs to the Lufthansa workers who had been present during the robbery. Ralph Rebman looked through dozens of mugshots. When he came to Tommy DeSimone's photograph, he paused. "That could be him," Rebman said. "The one who took off his mask. I am not 100% sure." But it looks like him. It was not enough for an arrest. But it was proof that the FBI was looking in the right direction. The investigation hit its first solid breakthrough with the van. Parnell Stacks Edwards had one job after the heist. Take the 40 Econoline van to John Gotti's salvage yard in New Jersey and have it crushed. That was it, one simple task that would destroy key evidence. Fingerprints, fibers, DNA traces, anything that could link the crew to the robbery. Burke had stressed this point over and over. Get rid of the van immediately. Do not stop anywhere. Do not park it. Drive straight to the yard and have it crushed, then take a cab back. Simple. Edwards promised Burke he understood. He would take care of it right away. But Edwards had been up for nearly 24 hours. He was tired. He had been drinking and using cocaine during the celebration. As he drove the van toward New Jersey, tiredness and being drunk overwhelmed him. He decided to stop at his girlfriend's apartment in Brooklyn. Just for a few hours of sleep, he would take care of the van later. He parked on a street in front of a fire hydrant, a no parking zone, and went upstairs. He fell asleep almost right away. Hours passed. A parking enforcement officer noticed the van illegally parked. A ticket was written when the van still had not moved by the end of the shift. The officer called for it to be towed. The van was taken to a police lot. During normal handling, an officer noticed something suspicious. The van matched the description of a vehicle possibly used in the Lufthansa heist. The Port Authority police had sent around descriptions of vehicles that might be linked to the robbery. The van was right away secured as possible evidence. FBI forensic teams came down on it. They found a treasure chest. Fingerprints on the steering wheel, door handles, and rear cargo area. Fibers, hair samples, partial shoe prints. The van had not been wiped down or cleaned. The lab lifted dozens of prints. Several were quickly named as belonging to Parnell Stacks Edwards. Others stayed unnamed, but were enough to tie the van to Burke's crew. The FBI now had physical evidence directly linking known criminals to the heist. It was a huge breakthrough in the investigation. When Jimmy Burke learned about the van, he was filled with rage. His careful planning, his exact doing, his professional crew, all weakened by one man's lack of skill. Stacks Edwards had done the worst sin. He had been sloppy. And sloppiness in Burke's world had only one punishment. On December 18, 1978, just 7 days after the heist, Burke sent Tommy DeSimone to deal with the problem. Tommy DeSimone knocked on the door of Stacks Edwards' apartment in Ozone Park. Edwards answered, probably relieved to see a familiar face. He might have been expecting Burke's anger. Maybe a beating, definitely a loss of his cut from the heist. What he did not expect was a death sentence. DeSimone entered the apartment. They talked briefly. Edwards tried to explain. He had been tired. He just needed a few hours of sleep. It had been a mistake. DeSimone listened, perhaps nodded with sympathy. Then he pulled out his .38 caliber handgun and shot Edwards 6 times, 4 bullets to the chest. 2 to the back of the head, done like an execution. Edwards died on his apartment floor, the first death of the Lufthansa heist. He never spent a penny of his share. His girlfriend found his body later that day and called police. NYPD homicide detectives answered. They quickly connected the murder to the Lufthansa investigation. Edwards was a known helper of Jimmy Burke, and his fingerprints had been found in the getaway van. The FBI was told right away the body count had begun. But Edwards would be far from the last for Burke. The murder of Edwards solved an immediate problem, silencing a man who could speak against the crew, but it also created a pattern. Burke saw that everyone involved in the heist was a possible witness. Everyone was a weak spot. The only way to truly protect himself was to get rid of all of them. The paranoia that would define the aftermath of the Lufthansa heist had begun. And Burke, cruel in planning, started checking names off his list. Despite Burke's clear warnings to stay quiet, Several members of the crew right away broke the most important rule. They started spending money like crazy. Louis Werner, who had received his cut of about $100,000, far less than the $587,500 he had been promised, could not help himself. He paid off his gambling debts, which right away raised red flags with the FBI agents watching him. How does a Lufthansa cargo boss making $27,000 a year suddenly pay off $20,000 in debts just weeks after the biggest robbery in his workplace's history? Werner also started wearing expensive jewelry, bought a new car, and took his family on vacation. Every buy was recorded by FBI watch teams. Werner's money records were ordered to court. Bank deposits were traced. The pattern was unmistakable. Martin Krugman was even worse. He went on a spending run that amazed the mind. New car, new clothes, expensive dinners. He bragged to friends about a big score and could not resist flashing cash. Krugman had expected $500,000 from the heist, his finder's fee for bringing the tip to Burke. But Burke had given him only a piece of that, maybe $50,000. Krugman made the deadly mistake of complaining. He went to Henry Hill, demanding his full share. Hill tried to calm him down, explaining that Burke would pay him eventually, that he needed to be patient, but Krugman was insistent. He threatened to go to Burke directly. Hill warned him, "Do not do that. Jimmy does not like people making demands. Just be patient." But Krugman would not listen. He called Burke over and over, demanding his money. Burke put him off, promising payment soon, but inside, Burke was boiling. Krugman had become a problem, a loud, flashy problem who could not keep his mouth shut. Tommy DeSimone and Angelo Seep also started spending without thinking. DeSimone bought jewelry and cars. Seep fixed up his house. Both men drew attention with their sudden wealth. Even some of the edge players started acting suspiciously. Robert McMahon made large buys. Louis Caffreux started talking about the heist to his wife and friends. The FBI noticed all of it. Watch teams recorded every buy, every deposit, every suspicious dealing. The agents did not have enough for arrests yet, but they were building a case piece by piece. And Burke noticed too, every break of his rules, every flashy buy, every loose word. It all registered in Burke's paranoid mind as proof that these men could not be trusted. They were weak spots, and Burke had a simple solution for weak spots. The killing would speed up. On January 10, 1979, less than a month after the heist, FBI agents arrested Louis Werner at his home. The evidence against him was overwhelming. His money records showed the sudden inflow of cash. His spending patterns matched someone who had recently gotten big money. Watch had recorded his suspicious behavior, and his inside knowledge of Lufthansa work made him the obvious inside man. Werner was charged with planning to commit robbery, theft, and other federal charges. He was brought to court and let out on bail. The FBI hoped he would cooperate, give information about who had planned and done the heist. But Werner, terrified of mob payback, refused to talk. "I do not know what you are talking about," Werner told investigators. "I did not have anything to do with any robbery." The evidence said otherwise. Federal prosecutors felt sure they could convict Werner even without his cooperation. His trial was set for later in the year. For Burke, Werner's arrest was both good news and bad news. Good because Werner had not cooperated with authorities, at least not yet. Bad because it confirmed that the FBI was strongly investigating the heist and had already connected one person to the crime. If they had found Werner, they might find others. Burke's paranoia grew stronger. He began to see threats everywhere. Anyone involved in the heist was a possible informant, a possible weak link who might trade information for less punishment. The only sure way to prevent that was to get rid of them. Martin Krugman continued to be a problem. He would not stop calling Burke, demanding the money he believed he was owed. Hill tried to step in, counseling patience, But Krugman was desperate. He had gone into debt paying for his own costs in hope of a huge payout, and now he needed cash immediately. In early January, Krugman went to Burke directly. Facing him at Robert's lounge, it was a terribly stupid move. The talk was short and heated. Burke told Krugman to go home, that they would settle up soon. "You had better," Krugman said, pointing his finger at Burke. "I am not playing around, Jimmy. I brought you this score. I deserve my share." Burke's face stayed without expression, but inside, he had made his decision. Krugman was dead, he just did not know it yet. On January 6, 1979, Krugman left his wig shop in Queens around 9 p.m. He told his wife he was going to meet someone about getting his money. She never saw him again, according to Henry Hill's later speaking. Burke and DeSimone picked up Krugman that night. They took him to a house in Queens, possibly owned by Burke or one of his helpers, in the basement. They questioned him about whether he had talked to anyone about the heist. Then they killed him. The method is unclear. Hill was not present for the murder, but most stories suggest choking or gunshot. Krugman's body was never found. He was likely got rid of in one of Burke's usual methods: taken apart and buried in multiple places, or dissolved in acid, or crushed in a car crusher. Burke was expert at making bodies disappear. Krugman's wife reported him missing. NYPD opened an investigation within days. Detectives connected his disappearance to the Lufthansa heist. Krugman's wig shop was near Robert's lounge. He was known to be with Burke's crew, and timing suggested mob involvement. The FBI added Krugman's disappearance to their growing file on Lufthansa-linked crimes. The body count was rising, and a pattern was coming up. Anyone linked to the heist was being carefully gotten rid of. Tommy DeSimone had been a problem since the day he was born, and by early 1979, his problems had caught up with him. The murder of Billy Batts in 1970, the made man he had killed without permission, had never been forgotten by the Gambino family. John Gotti, who was close to Batts, had never forgiven the insult also. DeSimone had murdered Ronald Foxy Jareth, another Gambino helper and Gotti's student. In 1979, the Gambinos wanted payback, but as long as DeSimone was under Paul Vario's protection with the Lucchese family, he was relatively safe. The families kept an uneasy peace, and doing someone from another family needed approval. On January 14, 1979, Tommy DeSimone was supposed to be made, formally brought into the Lucchese crime family as a full member. It would be the high point of his criminal career, the respect he had always wanted. DeSimone was excited. He put on his best suit. He went to the place where the ceremony was supposedly going to take place. He was never seen again. According to mob informants who spoke years later, the making ceremony was a setup. The Gambino family, with approval from Lucchese leadership, had set up for DeSimone to be killed. When Tommy arrived, he was taken to a basement. Instead of a ceremony, he was done. Likely with multiple gunshots to the head, his body was got rid of, probably buried or placed in a place where it would never be found. The official story within the mob was that Tommy had gone missing. Paul Vario told Henry Hill that Tommy had been killed, but would not give details. Hill suspected the truth that Tommy's past murders had finally caught up with him, and the families had approved his doing. Tommy DeSimone was 28 years old when he died. He had done dozens of murders during his short, violent life. Now he had become another number, another body in the growing pile of Lufthansa deaths. For Burke, Tommy's death was both a loss and a relief. Tommy had been useful, a reliable killer, willing to do Burke's dirty work without question. But Tommy was also reckless, violent, unpredictable. An increasingly a weak spot, his murder removed one more person who could speak about the heist. Through the spring and summer of 1979, more bodies piled up. Burke, working with cold, planned paranoia, continued getting rid of anyone linked to the Lufthansa heist. Joe Buddha Manri, who worked at Air France and had inside knowledge of airport work. Disappeared in May 1979. His body was found in a refrigerated truck. Shot multiple times, the murder was clearly mob-linked. Manry had been promised $50,000 for his part in planning the heist. He never received the full amount and had complained to friends about being shortchanged. His complaints reached Burke's ears. Burke could not stand loose talk. Robert "Frenchie" McMahon and his friend Joe were found murdered on May 16, 1979. Both had been shotgun style. McMahon had been another inside man at the airport, giving information about security and work like others. He had started spending money flashily and talking too much. Burke sent his hitmen to silence him forever. Joe was killed simply because he was present. Wrong place, wrong time. Side damage in Burke's cleanup operation. Louis Cafora and his wife Joanna disappeared in March 1979. Cafora had been part of Burke's crew and had taken part in cleaning some of the Lufthansa money. He had also been spending, obviously. Buying a new car and fixing up his house, worse. He had been talking to his wife about the heist, and she had started spending as well. Burke could not risk that Cafora might talk if arrested. And he certainly could not risk that Cafro's wife might speak about what her husband had told her. Both were murdered. Their bodies were never recovered. Paolo Lucchese, the Gambino family's representative in the heist, was found dead in June 1979. He had been choked and stuffed in the trunk of a car. Lucchese had been demanding a larger share of the money, arguing that the Gambino family deserved more since the airport was shared area. His demands made him a problem, and Burke solved the problem in his usual way. Angelo Seep managed to survive longer than most. But his time would come in July 1984. 5 years after the heist, Seep was found shot to death along with his girlfriend Joanne Lombardo in Seep's Brooklyn basement. The double murder was clearly mob-linked. Seep had been one of the most trusted members of Burke's crew. But even that trust had limits by 1984. Burke was concerned that Seep might cooperate with authorities to reduce his own legal troubles. The murder came just before Seep was scheduled to speak in an unrelated case. Teresa Ferrara, Tommy DeSimone's former girlfriend, who knew many details of the heist, was murdered in February 1979 and her body dumped at sea. A pattern was unmistakable. Anyone linked to the Lufthansa heist was being carefully gotten rid of. The FBI noticed the pattern too. Bodies were piling up, and in almost every case, the victim had some connection to the robbery or to Jimmy Burke. FBI Special Agent Tom Sweeney would later guess that at least 11 people were murdered in connection with the Lufthansa heist. Though the actual number might be higher, some bodies were never found. Some murders might not have been recognized as Lufthansa-linked for the surviving people. The message was clear: take the money and die. Talk to the FBI and die. Demand your full share and die. Spend obviously and die. There was no winning situation. The perfect crime had become a perfect death trap. Despite Werner's arrest and the growing body count, the FBI still could not build a case against Jimmy Burke. Specifically for the Lufthansa heist, Burke was too careful. He never touched the stolen money directly. It all went through go-betweens. He never discussed the heist where he could be recorded. Witnesses who could speak against him kept turning up dead. The FBI tried every investigative tool available. They put Burke under constant watch, following him everywhere, photographing his meetings, recording his movements. They tapped phones. They talked to hundreds of witnesses. They offered immunity deals to possible cooperators. But Burke's reputation for violence made cooperation nearly impossible. Informing on Jimmy Burke was suicide. The FBI did succeed in tying up some loose ends. They recovered about $20,000 of the stolen money, a tiny piece of the $6 million take. The jewelry was harder to trace since much of it had been broken down and sold. Some pieces were recovered in pawn shops and jewelry stores. but most disappeared into the black market. Investigators also focused on possible money cleaning operations. Where had the cash gone? Burke could not simply deposit $6 million into bank accounts. That would start immediate federal checking. The money had to be cleaned through businesses, changed into assets, or hidden. The FBI found several possible cleaning channels. Real estate buys made through shell companies. Cash-heavy businesses like restaurants and bars, where dirty money could be mixed with real receipts. Offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands and Switzerland. Buys of valuable art and collectibles that could be resold later. And investments in businesses run by mob-linked helpers. But proving Burke's connection to these operations was difficult. Burke used multiple layers of go-betweens. Shell companies were registered to relatives or helpers with no obvious connection to Burke. Cash was moved in small amounts that would not start bank reporting needs. The operation was well-planned and well-planned. The FBI's frustration grew. They knew Burke had masterminded the heist. They knew he was behind the murders, but they could not prove it in court. Every possible witness was either dead or too terrified to speak. Physical evidence was minimal. Burke had been careful about that. Without cooperating witnesses or hard physical evidence, prosecution was impossible. Then in 1980, the FBI caught a break. It came from an unexpected source, Henry Hill. Arrested on drug charges and facing serious prison time. Decided to save his own life by betraying everyone he knew. Louis Werner's trial began in fall of 1979. Federal prosecutors laid out their case methodically. Werner had inside knowledge of Lufthansa work. He had big gambling debts that gave reason. His money records showed a sudden inflow of cash right after the robbery. His spending patterns were consistent with someone who had received money from the heist. And Watch had recorded his suspicious behavior before and after the robbery. Werner's defense lawyer argued that the evidence was indirect. Yes, Werner had gambling debts, but that did not prove he took part in the robbery. Yes, he had some extra money, but he claimed it came from real sources. Loans from friends, winning bets, savings. The prosecution countered with detailed money analysis. They showed that Werner's claimed sources of income did not match the amounts he had spent. They showed that his debt payments came right after the heist, too coincidental to be explained away. They presented speaking from Lufthansa workers who described Werner's unusual interest in security steps and shipment schedules in the months before the robbery. The jury talked for 3 days in November 1979. They returned a decision, guilty on all counts. Werner was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison. He was also told to pay back money, though the amount recovered from him was minimal compared to what he had received. Even after being found guilty, Werner refused to cooperate with authorities. He would not name the people who had planned and done the heist. His silence was driven partly by fear, informing on Jimmy Burke meant death, and partly by the criminal code he had lived by all his life. In the mob world, rats were the lowest form of life. Werner would serve most of his sentence. Werner was let out on parole in 1988 and lived quietly until his death in 2015. He never publicly discussed the Lufthansa heist or his part in it. His being found guilty was the FBI's first major success in the case. But it was also frustrating. Werner was just the inside man. The helper. The FBI wanted Burke. The mastermind, and Burke stayed untouchable. Of the $5,875,000 stolen in the Lufthansa heist, only a tiny piece was ever recovered. Where did the rest go? According to Henry Hill's later speaking to the FBI, Burke kept the lion's share, probably around $4 million. From that he paid tribute to Paul Vario, perhaps $1 million. Cuts went to John Gotti and Vincent Asaro for area respect and help. Probably $500,000 combined. The rest was given out to crew members, fences who helped clean the jewelry, corrupt cops and officials who needed to be paid off, and lawyers who would be needed when arrests came. But even accounting for all these give-outs, millions of dollars stayed unaccounted for. The FBI suspected Burke had hidden the money, waiting for the heat to die down before getting to it. Possible hiding places included buried stashes. Burke was known to bury money and valuables in far-off places. He owned property in upstate New York and Florida. He had access to properties owned by friends and helpers. FBI agents spent years searching these places with ground-penetrating radar and cadaver dogs. But if Burke had buried money, he had chosen his hiding spots well. Safe deposit boxes registered under false names or through shell companies. Burke could have hidden cash in banks throughout New York and other states, without knowing which banks or which names. The FBI faced an impossible task: offshore accounts. Though less common in 1978 than today, offshore banking was available to those with connections. Burke had ties to international operations. Money could have been moved to Switzerland, the Cayman Islands, or other banking havens. Investments in real businesses. Cash-heavy businesses like restaurants, bars, laundromats, and car washes were perfect for cleaning money. Burke could invest stolen cash as business income and slowly get to it over time. Given to trusted family members, Burke's wife and children might have received money for safekeeping. As long as they did not spend obviously, the FBI could not prove the money came from the heist. The most likely situation, according to FBI analysis, was a combination of these methods. Burke was too smart to keep all the money in one place. He would have spread it out, spreading the risk. Some buried, some in banks, some cleaned through businesses, some with family. But here's the sad irony: Burke never got to enjoy most of the money. He was arrested in 1980 for unrelated crimes and would spend the rest of his life in prison. He died in 1996, taking the place of the money to his grave. If there are still millions hidden somewhere, they stay hidden to this day. Various treasure hunters, amateur investigators, and curiosity seekers have searched for the Lufthansa money over the years. Properties linked to Burke have been looked at. Former helpers have been questioned. But the money has never been found. Perhaps it was all spent, given out to more people than the FBI knew about, cleaned so thoroughly that it became untraceable. Or perhaps it is still out there, buried in a forest in upstate New York, or sitting in a safe deposit box under a false name, waiting for someone to find it. By 1980, Henry Hill was in serious trouble. His drug habit had spun out of control. He was using cocaine daily, dealing drugs, and making reckless decisions. The discipline that had kept him successful in the mob world had disappeared in a cloud of powder cocaine and paranoia. Hill knew too much about too many crimes. He had been involved in the Lufthansa heist planning. Though he was not present for the actual robbery, he knew about Burke's murders. He knew where bodies were buried, literally. He knew the names of every major player in Paul Vario's crew. He was a walking book of mob secrets, and Jimmy Burke knew it. Hill had noticed Burke's paranoia getting stronger. One by one, Hill watched his friends disappear or turn up dead. Stax Edwards done for leaving the van. Martin Krugman vanished for demanding his money. Tommy Disimoni killed by the Gambinos. Joe Manry shot and left in a truck. Frenchie McMahon done with his friend. Hill realized with growing terror that he was on Burke's list. He knew too much. His drug habit made him unreliable. A possible informant waiting to happen. His wife Karen was terrified, begging him to quit the life before Burke killed him. In April 1980, Hill was arrested by drug detectives in a drug raid. He was caught with cocaine, heroin, and marijuana. Federal prosecutors charged him with drug moving, a charge that carried a possible sentence of 25 years to life. Hill was 41 years old. 25 years meant he would die in prison. The FBI saw a chance. They had been investigating the Lufthansa heist and linked murders for nearly 2 years with limited success. Werner was found guilty, but Burke stayed untouchable. The FBI needed someone from inside Burke's crew, someone who knew the details. Someone who could speak. Henry Hill was perfect. FBI agents approached Hill with an offer: cooperate completely. Speak against Burke and Vario and enter the witness protection program. In exchange, the federal charges would be reduced and Hill would avoid life in prison. More importantly, the FBI would protect him from mob payback. Hill was terrified, becoming an informant. A rat in mob words was the worst betrayal. It broke everything he had been taught since age 11. Rats were killed and their families were often killed. 2. The mob had long memories and endless patience. But Hill was also practical. He saw his options: cooperate and live probably, or refuse and either die in prison or be murdered by Burke within days of release. Burke had already killed a dozen people linked to Lufthansa. Hill would be next on May 27, 1980. Henry Hill made his decision. He agreed to cooperate with the FBI. He would tell them everything he knew about the Lufthansa heist, the murders that followed, and decades of criminal activity by the Lucchese crime family. It was one of the most important mob informant cases in FBI history. The FBI's questioning of Henry Hill lasted for months. Agents Tom Sweeney and Ed McDonald, an assistant U.S. lawyer with the Eastern District of New York, did the talks. Hill sat in a safe place protected by U.S. Marshals and talked and talked and talked. Hill's memory was amazing. He could remember specific dates, places, names, and details of crimes going back 25 years. He described the Lufthansa heist in small detail, how Martin Krugman brought the tip, how Burke planned the operation, who was involved, how the money was divided or not divided, what went wrong with the van, and most importantly, what happened afterward. Hill gave information about murders. Parnell Stacks Edwards shot by Tommy DeSimone for failing to get rid of the van. Martin Krugman killed by Burke for demanding his money. Tommy DeSimone murdered by the Gambino family with Lucchese approval. Joe Manry killed for talking too much. Robert McMahon and Joe got rid of as witnesses. Louis and Joanna Cafrou killed because they knew too much. Paula Lee Castri murdered for demanding a bigger share. Angelo Seep, though Seep would not be killed until 1984. Hill also gave details about other crimes not linked to Lufthansa. The Air France robbery in 1967, hundreds of truck hijackings, point shaving in Boston College basketball games, a shame Burke had planned, loan sharking operations, drug moving, and dozens of other crimes. The information was gold for prosecutors. Hill could give speaking that would put Burke and Vario away for life. But there was a problem: Hill's believability. He was a career criminal, a drug addict, and a self-admitted person in many of the crimes he was describing. Defense lawyers would rip him apart on cross-examination. The prosecution needed proof, physical evidence, witnesses, papers that proved Hill was telling the truth. The FBI went to work checking Hill's information. They checked dates and places of murders against police records, talked to witnesses who could confirm Hill's presence at certain places, got phone records that showed calls between Hill and other people, looked over money records that matched Hill's descriptions of money flows, searched properties where Hill said bodies or evidence might be found. Much of Hill's information checked out. The dates matched, the places matched, witnesses confirmed key details. The FBI now had enough to build cases against multiple members of Burke's crew, but they still faced challenges. Many of the people Hill named were already dead, killed by Burke or others. Physical evidence for murders that happened years earlier was often not there. Bodies had been got rid of expertly, crime scenes had been cleaned, witnesses had been scared or gotten rid of. Paul Vario was arrested in May 1984 as part of a wide Lucchese charge based heavily on Henry Hill's speaking. Hill spoke in detail about Vario's part as capo of the Lucchese family, his control of work at JFK Airport, his knowledge of and approval for the Lufthansa heist. and his receipt of tribute money from the robbery, Vario's trial was a media sensation. The aging mobster, now in his 70s, sat quietly as Hill, his former student, described decades of criminal activity. Hill spoke about how Vario had taught him since age 11, how Vario had run his crew with iron discipline, and how Vario had shared in the profits of hundreds of crimes. The defense attacked Hill's believability strongly. They pointed out his drug habit, his criminal history, his reason to lie to get a reduced sentence, and differences in his speaking, but prosecutors had proving evidence. FBI Watch confirmed many of Hill's claims. Money records showed money flows that matched Hill's descriptions. Other witnesses given immunity spoke to some of the same facts. In August 1985, Paul Vario was found guilty. He was sentenced to 4 years in federal prison. He would later receive extra sentences for other crimes. Finally totaling 10 years, Vario died in prison in 1988 at age 73. The powerful capo who had controlled criminal work at JFK for decades died behind bars, betrayed by the young man he had once treated like a son. Arresting and finding guilty Jimmy Burke proved more difficult. Burke was careful, paranoid, and cruel. He had killed or scared most witnesses who could speak against him. Hill's speaking could link Burke to the Lufthansa heist planning and the later murders. But prosecutors worried it might not be enough. Then they caught a break with an unrelated case in 1979. Burke had planned the murder of Richard Eaton, a drug dealer who owed Burke money. Burke choked Eaton himself, then had the body got rid of at the time. Burke thought he had gotten away with it, but the FBI had been investigating, and they found witnesses in 1982. Based on speaking from multiple sources, including Hill, Burke was charged with Eaton's murder. The case was solid. Witnesses placed Burke at the scene. Forensic evidence supported the murder timeline, and Burke had a clear reason. Burke was also charged with fixing the 1,978-79 Boston College basketball point shaving plan. Hill spoke that Burke had paid Boston College players to shave points, to win games but not cover the point spread, allowing Burke to make huge profits betting against the spread. Burke went to trial in 1982. His lawyers put up a strong defense, attacking witness believability and arguing that Burke was being set up because of his reputation. But the evidence was overwhelming. Burke was found guilty in February 1982 of fixing Boston College basketball games and sentenced to 20 years. In 1985, he received a separate life sentence for the 1979 murder of drug dealer Richard Eaton. He would die in prison serving the life sentence. The irony was painful. Burke had masterminded the biggest cash robbery in American history. He had stolen $6 million. He had killed at least 11 people to protect himself. But he was never formally charged with the Lufthansa heist itself. He went to prison for an unrelated murder. Prosecutors tried to build extra cases against Burke for the Lufthansa-linked murders, but the bodies had been too well hidden. Evidence had been destroyed, and witnesses were dead. Hill's speaking alone was not enough. The defense could argue it was uncorroborated talk from a career criminal. Burke kept his innocence until his death. He never admitted involvement in the Lufthansa heist. He never revealed where the money was hidden. He showed no regret for the murders he had done. In prison, Burke was a model inmate. He did not cause trouble. He worked in the prison library. He received occasional visits from family members. But his health got worse. He developed cancer and pneumonia. On April 13, 1996, at age 64, James Burke died in prison. He had spent the last 14 years of his life behind bars. The mastermind of the Lufthansa heist took his secrets to the grave. If millions of dollars stay hidden somewhere, Burke never told anyone where. Entering the witness protection program saved Henry Hill's life and destroyed his identity. He, his wife Karen, and their 2 children were given new names. new backgrounds, and moved to a secret place. Later shown to be Nebraska, then Kentucky, then Washington State. Hill struggled with the change. He was cut off from everything he knew. His friends all dead or in prison anyway. His neighborhood, his lifestyle. He had to learn to live as a civilian working real jobs. For a man who had been a criminal since age 11, it was almost impossible. Karen Hill struggled too. She had known about her husband's criminal life and had enjoyed the money and excitement. Now they were in witness protection, living in middle America, trying to blend in. The marriage would not survive. They divorced in 1990. Hill broke the terms of witness protection over and over. He was arrested for drunk driving, attack, and drug possession at various times. Each arrest risked exposing his identity and place. The Marshal Service had to move him multiple times. But Hill also discovered a new career, celebrity criminal, in 1985. He worked with crime reporter Nicholas Pileggi on a book about his life. Originally titled Wise Guy, the book was a bestseller, giving a detailed insider's account of mob life that had never been seen before. In 1990, director Martin Scorsese adapted Wise Guy into the film Goodfellas, starring Ray Liotta as Henry Hill, Robert De Niro as Jimmy Conway, Burke, and Joe Pesci as Tommy DeVito, Desimone. The film was a critical and commercial success, earning 6 Oscar nominations and winning 1 for Pesci's supporting role. The film made the Lufthansa Heist famous forever. While Scorsese took some creative freedoms, the basic story was accurate. The heist, the murders, Hill's fall into drug habit, and his decision to inform on his friends to save his life. Hill became a minor celebrity. He did interviews, appeared on talk shows, and consulted on mob-linked media projects. He wrote extra books. He even started a website selling Goodfellas goods. His life had gone from organized crime to organized business, but the mob never forgot. There was a price on Hill's head, supposedly. $1 million for anyone who killed him. Hill lived in constant fear that someone would recognize him and claim the reward. He moved often, always looking over his shoulder. Henry Hill died on June 12, 2012, at age 69 from heart disease. He had survived 50 years in the mob and 32 years as an informant. His death was noted by major media outlets, a testament to how his story had caught public imagination. Karen Hill, his ex-wife, wrote her own book about her life with Henry. On the Run, a Mafia Childhood, their children, whose lives had been defined by their father's choices, tried to live quietly away from the spotlight. Hill's legacy is complex. He was a career criminal who took part in theft, violence, and drug moving. He helped send his friends to prison or added to their deaths. But his cooperation also helped the FBI take apart a big part of the Lucchese crime family's work and gave amazing insight into how the mob worked. In the end, Hill survived by doing the one thing mob culture absolutely forbids. He talked, and in talking, he made sure that the story of the Lufthansa heist would be told and retold for generations. In January 2014, 36 years after the Lufthansa heist, federal agents made a shocking arrest. Vincent Asaro, an old Bonanno crime family capo, was charged with taking part in the robbery and with murder linked to the heist's aftermath. Asaro was 80 years old at the time of his arrest. According to prosecutors, he had been one of the key people in the heist, giving access to airport places and helping to plan the operation. The charge said that Asaro received a share of the money and was involved in the murder of Paul Katz, a former mob helper whose body was discovered in 2013, buried under a house linked to Burke. The case was based on speaking from Asaro's cousin, Gaspar Valenti, who had become a government cooperator, and wide FBI watch and wiretaps from the 2000s and 2010s. Prosecutors claimed they had recorded Asaro discussing the Lufthansa heist and complaining that he had been cheated out of his fair share of the money. The The trial began in October 2015. It was a media sensation. The Lufthansa heist back in the news after nearly 4 decades, with an actual person finally charged with the crime. Prosecutors presented their case. Witness speaking from Valenti describing Assaro's part. Watch recordings, though not as clear as prosecutors hoped. And indirect evidence linking Assaro to Burke's crew. The defense attacked Valenti's believability. He was a career criminal with reasons to lie. They argued the watch recordings were unclear. Assaro could have been making up stories to sound important. Physical evidence was not there after so many years, on November 12, 2015. After 3 days of talking, the jury returned a decision. Not guilty on all counts, Assaro was let go. He walked out of the courthouse a free man. The decision shocked prosecutors. They had been confident in their case. But the jury simply did not find the evidence convincing beyond a reasonable doubt. Valenti's speaking was too tainted by his criminal history and his deal with the government. The recordings were open to understanding after 36 years. Proving Assaro's specific part was impossible. Assaro's being let go meant that no one had ever been successfully prosecuted, specifically for the Lufthansa heist itself. Werner was found guilty for his part as inside man. Burke died in prison for other crimes, but the robbery itself, the actual theft of $6 million, stayed technically unsolved in terms of criminal findings of guilt for the heist proper. However, Assaro's freedom was short-lived. In 2020, at age 85, Assaro was given compassionate release due to COVID-19 concerns. The question that has obsessed investigators, treasure hunters, and true crime lovers for over 40 years, where is the Lufthansa money? Of the $5,875,000 stolen, the FBI recovered about $20,000. Less than 1% of the take. The jewelry was mostly fenced and impossible to trace. The cash, untraceable to begin with, vanished into the criminal underworld. Various theories have been proposed. Theory 1, it was all spent. This is the FBI's official position. Burke paid tribute to Vario, $1 million or more. He paid off Gotti and Assaro. He gave cuts to crew members. He paid lawyers, corrupt cops, and officials. He spent on keeping his lifestyle over time. Through hundreds of small buys and payments, the money was used up. There is no treasure to find because it was all used. Theory 2, Burke buried it. Burke owned property in upstate New York and had access to properties owned by helpers. He was known to bury money and valuables. Perhaps millions of dollars are still buried somewhere in the woods of New York, waiting to be discovered. The FBI searched many properties but never found large stashes. That does not mean they are not there, just that Burke chose his hiding spots well. Theory 3, offshore accounts. Burke could have moved money offshore through mob connections to international banking. Swiss bank accounts, Cayman Islands, Panama. These places protected client privacy and did not cooperate with U.S. law enforcement in the 1970s. Money put there would be nearly impossible to trace. Theory 4, safe deposit boxes. Burke could have rented dozens of safe deposit boxes under false names throughout New York, New Jersey, and other states. Each box might contain $50,000 to $100,000 in cash, without knowing which banks and which names. The FBI had no way to find them. Those boxes might still exist today. The contents undiscovered because Burke never got them back. Theory 5, family members have it. Burke's wife, children, or other family members might have received pieces of the money for safekeeping. As long as they did not spend obviously, the money would be safe. Burke's family has always denied having any Lufthansa money, but they would say that regardless. The most likely reality is a combination. Some money was spent, some might be buried. Some might be in offshore accounts, some might be in safe deposit boxes. Burke was too smart to put all his eggs in one basket. But here is the sad truth. Even if millions of dollars stayed hidden somewhere, Burke took the place to his grave. He died in prison, bitter and silent. If he told anyone where the money was, that person has kept the secret. Various people have searched over the years. Properties linked to Burke have been looked at with metal detectors and ground-penetrating radar. Former mob helpers have been questioned. Burke's family has been investigated, but the money has never been found. Perhaps someday someone will find a buried stash while digging a foundation for a new house. Or a forgotten safe deposit box will be opened when the bank closes an unclaimed account. Or a deathbed confession from a former mob member will show the place until then. The Lufthansa money stays one of the great unsolved mysteries of American crime. In 1990, Martin Scorsese's Goodfellas brought the Lufthansa heist to worldwide attention. Based on Nicholas Pileggi's book Wise Guy and adapted by Pileggi and Scorsese, the film told Henry Hill's story from his childhood, bringing into the mob through his career as a criminal to his final betrayal of his friends. The Lufthansa heist itself takes up only about 10 minutes of screen time in the film, but it is the dramatic center. Scorsese shows the heist's aftermath brilliantly. The nervous paranoia, the stupid mistakes crew members make, the growing body count as Jimmy Conway, Burke, gets rid of witnesses. Robert De Niro's performance as Conway Burke is chilling. He plays Burke as a charming person without care for others. Friendly and charming one moment, coldly planning murder the next. The montage sequence showing the discovery of bodies set to Eric Clapton's Layla is one of cinema's great moments. Beautiful and horrifying at the same time. The film was nominated for 6 Academy Awards, including Best Picture and Best Director. Joe Pesci won Best Supporting Actor for his explosive performance as Tommy DeVito, De Simone. Ray Liotta's showing of Henry Hill became famous, his voiceover narration giving the insider's view. It made the film feel real. Goodfellas did something amazing. It made the audience feel for criminals, while never making their violence seem good. We understand why Hill was tempted by mob life. The money, the respect, the excitement. But we also see the cruel results. We watch as the dream becomes a nightmare. As friends kill friends, as paranoia destroys trust. As the house of cards falls, the film's impact on popular culture was huge. Quotes from Goodfellas entered everyday language. The film influenced countless gangster movies and TV shows that followed. It cemented the Lufthansa heist's place in American cultural mythology for those who lived through the events. Surviving crew members, law enforcement, families of victims. The film was both validation and violation. The story was finally being told to a mass audience. But it was also being dramatized, made exciting, turned into entertainment. Their tragedies had become box office gold. Henry Hill consulted on the film and appeared in promotional interviews. He seemed to enjoy his celebrity, but there was always an edge of sadness. He had betrayed his friends to survive, spent years in hiding, and now his story was playing in theaters worldwide. It was fame, but of the most questionable kind. The Lufthansa heist has stayed culturally relevant for 45 years. Books, films, documentaries, podcasts, and articles continue to explore the crime and its aftermath. Why? What makes this particular heist so endlessly fascinating? Several factors add to it. The size at the time. It was the biggest cash robbery in American history. $6 million was an almost impossible to understand amount. Even today, changed for inflation to over $28 million. It represents the kind of score criminals dream about, the perfect doing. The heist itself was brilliantly planned and perfectly done. No one was killed during the robbery. The crew got away clean with the money. As a purely technical crime, it was masterful. We admire skill even in criminals. The amazing failure, but then everything fell apart. The perfect crime became a perfect disaster. Nearly everyone involved died or went to prison. The mastermind never got to enjoy his money. It is a Greek tragedy in modern dress. Pride leading inevitably to downfall, the inside view. Thanks to Henry Hill's cooperation, we know close details about how the heist was planned, who was involved, and what happened afterward. Hill's speaking gave a level of detail rarely available in criminal cases. We are not guessing about reasons or rebuilding events. We are hearing from someone who was there, the characters. The people involved were fascinating, Burke. The charming person without care for others, Hill. The hustler who talked his way into survival, DeSimone, the violent, crazy person. These are not cardboard criminals. They are complex. Opposite human beings doing terrible things for understandable reasons. The moral unclearness, we know these were bad people doing bad things. But the story forces us to feel for them anyway. We understand Hill's fear. We get Burke's paranoia even as we are horrified by his murders. We see how poverty and situation can push people toward crime. The story does not offer easy answers or simple morality, the unsolved mystery. The missing money adds an element of treasure hunt mystery. Somewhere, possibly, millions of dollars stay hidden. That possibility teases investigators and treasure hunters. Maybe he will be the one to find it, the connection to Goodfellas. Scorsese's film introduced the story to millions who might never have heard of it otherwise. The film's artistic excellence and cultural impact kept the story alive for new generations. It is easy to get caught up in the drama and excitement of the Lufthansa story. The planning, the doing, the cat and mouse with the FBI. It reads like a Hollywood thriller, but we should not forget the real cost. At least 10 people, and possibly 1 or 2 more, were murdered because they were linked to the Lufthansa heist. Parnell Stacks Edwards, Martin Krugman, Tommy DeSimone, Joe Buda, Manry, Robert Frenchie McMahon, Joe, side damage, Louis Caffro, Joanna Cafra, side damage, Paulo Licastri, Teresa Ferrara. And the count might be higher. Some murders may not have been recognized as Lufthansa linked. Some bodies were never found. Each of these people left behind families. Spouses, children, parents, brothers and sisters, who lost loved ones to Burke's paranoid violence. Most of the victims were not even career criminals. They were small-time helpers or unfortunate bystanders who knew too much or said the wrong thing. Louis Werner spent 15 years in federal prison for his part as inside man. He lost his freedom, his career, and his reputation. His family was traumatized. Henry Hill survived, but at huge cost. He lost his identity, his friends, his marriage, and any chance at a normal life. He spent 32 years looking over his shoulder, terrified that someone would recognize him and claim the price on his head. His children grew up in witness protection. Their childhoods defined by their father's crimes. Jimmy Burke died in prison, never having enjoyed most of the money he killed for. His last 14 years were spent behind bars. His legacy, one of violence and betrayal. Paul Vario died in prison, the powerful capo reduced to just another inmate. The Lufthansa workers who were held at gunpoint during the robbery lived with trauma. Some had nightmares for years. Some could not return to work at the airport. The violence touched hundreds of lives directly and thousands more indirectly. For what? For money that was mostly never recovered. For a score that destroyed everyone who touched it. For a brief moment of triumph that turned into decades of death and imprisonment. The Lufthansa heist proves a basic truth about major crimes. The money is never worth the cost. Burke could have stolen $100 million, and it still would not have justified 11 murders and the destruction of dozens of lives. Looking back over 45 years, what can we learn from the Lufthansa heist? 1. There is no honor among thieves. The myth of loyal criminals bound by a code is just that. A myth when the stakes were high enough. Burke killed his own crew without hesitation. Friendship, loyalty, shared history. None of it mattered when weighed against Burke's paranoia and greed. 2. Perfect crimes do not exist. The The heist itself was brilliantly done. But the aftermath was a disaster. Stacks forgot to get rid of the van. Tommy showed his face. Crew members spent money. Obviously, Werner flashed cash. Each small mistake added up until the whole operation came apart. There is no such thing as a perfect crime, because humans are imperfect. 3. Greed destroys everything. If Burke had paid everyone fairly, stayed quiet for a year, and been patient, most of the crew might have survived. But he could not share. He wanted it all. His greed changed a successful heist into a massacre. Greed does not just corrupt, it kills for. Violence leads to more violence. Burke's first murder. Stacks made the second easier. Each killing lowered the bar for the next by the end. Burke was getting rid of people on the slightest suspicion. Violence creates a self-strengthening cycle where the only solution to problems becomes more violence. 5. The FBI never stops, even when the case seemed unsolvable. FBI agents kept investigating. They followed leads for years. They built cases methodically. Criminals may have temporary advantages, but law enforcement has endless patience and endless resources. Eventually, most criminals are caught. 6. Informants are inevitable in major crimes involving multiple people. Someone eventually talks. Henry Hill cooperated to save himself. Others would have done the same if given the chance. Criminals depend on everyone keeping quiet. But human nature makes that impossible when facing life in prison. 7. Crime ruins lives, including the criminals. Every person directly involved in the Lufthansa heist either died violently, went to prison, or spent years hiding in fear. None of them got lasting wealth or happiness. The crime destroyed their lives as thoroughly as if they had been victims instead of people doing the crimes. 8. The money is not worth it. This is the final lesson. $6 million sounds like a fortune. Life-changing wealth, but of all the people involved, almost none benefited. They killed and died for money they never got to spend. The promise of wealth was an illusion that cost them everything. And that is the complete story of the Lufthansa heist. The perfect crime that became a perfect nightmare shortly after 3 o'clock 1000 on the morning of December 11th, 1978. 6 men walked into a cargo terminal at JFK Airport in just over an hour. Stole nearly $6 million in cash and jewelry. It was brilliant, it was bold, it was by any fair measure an extraordinarily successful robbery. But success is measured not just in the taking. It is measured in the keeping, in the aftermath. In what happens when the adrenaline fades and reality sets in. Within 7 days of the heist, the first body appeared. Stacks Edwards shot 6 times for the sin of being too tired and too high to follow simple instructions. Within a month, Martin Krugman had vanished. His crime being that he demanded the money he had been promised. Within a year, at least 8 people were dead or missing. Their bodies spread across New York or dissolved into nothing. Jimmy Burke, the mastermind, the man they called the Gent, killed them all. He killed his friends, his partners, his helpers. He killed without hesitation, without regret, with the cold skill of a man who saw human life as nothing more than a variable in an equation. Keep the money, get rid of the witnesses. Survive, simple math, but Burke's math failed him. He went to prison for an unrelated murder. He died behind bars 14 years later, never having enjoyed the millions he had stolen and killed for. The money vanished, perhaps buried in forests or hidden in banks. But certainly beyond Burke's reach. He died bitter, alone, and poor. Hardly the retirement he had imagined when planning the biggest heist in American history. Henry Hill survived by betraying everyone he knew. He became an informant, spoke against his friends, and spent the rest of his life in witness protection. He got a kind of fame through his book and through Goodfellas. But it was a hollow celebrity. He was a rat, a turncoat. The lowest thing in the criminal world. He saved his life but destroyed his soul. Paul Vario, the powerful capo, died in prison. Louis Werner served 15 years for being the inside man. Tommy DeSimone was done before he could celebrate his 30th birthday. One by one, everyone touched by the Lufthansa money paid the price. And for what? $6 million that mostly disappeared. A moment of glory that became a lifetime of regret. A perfect crime that destroyed everyone who took part. The real price of the Lufthansa heist was not measured in dollars. It was measured in bodies, 11 confirmed dead. Possibly more. Families destroyed. Children made orphans, lives ruined beyond repair. If you made it this far in this story, you are a true crime legend. Drop a comment and let me know what you think about Jimmy Burke. Was he a criminal mastermind who almost pulled off the perfect crime? Or was he a monster whose paranoia and violence guaranteed that everyone involved would die or be destroyed? Was there any way this could have ended differently? If Burke had paid everyone fairly and insisted everyone stay quiet and disciplined, could the crew have gotten away with it? Or was the heist doomed from the moment they said yes? The size of the score guaranteeing that greed and fear would eventually tear them apart. Think about Stax Edwards falling asleep instead of crushing the van. One mistake, one moment of tiredness, and he was done. Think about Martin Krugman demanding the money he had been promised and vanishing forever. Think about Tommy DeSimone, the crazy killer who murdered dozens, but was himself murdered before turning 30. Think about Henry Hill, who survived by becoming the one thing mobsters hate more than anything. A rat, he saved his life but lost his identity. Spending 3 decades looking over his shoulder, waiting for someone to recognize him and put a bullet in his head. And think about Jimmy Burke, the gent, charming and deadly, who planned the perfect heist and then carefully destroyed everyone who had helped him do it. Burke spent his last years in prison, dying slowly of cancer. Taking his secrets to the grave, did he have regrets? Did he think about the people he had killed? Did he ever wish he had just paid everyone fairly and let them all live? We will never know. Burke never talked. He never confessed. He never showed regret. He died as he lived, silent, hard, and alone. The Lufthansa heist stays officially unsolved in the sense that no one was ever successfully prosecuted specifically for the robbery itself. Werner was found guilty for his part as inside man, but the actual robbery charges never stuck to the crew members. Burke died in prison for other crimes. Asaro was let go in 2015. The men who pulled the trigger, carried the boxes, and drove the van are all dead, but we know what happened. Thanks to Henry Hill's cooperation, thanks to FBI investigation, thanks to decades of research and speaking in papers, we know the story in amazing detail. We know who planned it, who did it, who died for it, and who profited from it. Almost no one. As it turns out, the money, at least most of it, stays missing 45 years later, somewhere. Possibly millions of dollars in cash sits undiscovered. Maybe buried in a forest, maybe in a safe deposit box under a false name. Maybe cleaned so thoroughly it became untraceable. Maybe spent so gradually that it disappeared without anyone noticing. Or maybe it was never as much as we thought. Maybe Burke spent more than he admitted. Maybe he paid off more people than we know. Maybe the legendary $6 million shrank through give out and spending until nothing remarkable stayed. The cultural legacy of the Lufthansa heist far goes beyond its actual impact. At the time, it was the biggest cash robbery in American history. But bigger heists have happened since, in pure money terms. Lufthansa would not even make the top 20 largest robberies worldwide today. What makes Lufthansa special is the story. The rise and fall, the betrayal, the violence, the stupid mistakes, and the tragic waste of human life. It is a story that has everything: brilliant planning, amazing doing, immediate success, and terrible failure. It is a morality tale about greed, paranoia, loyalty, and betrayal. It is a window into a world most of us never see. The world of organized crime where violence is money and trust is deadly. Goodfellas made the heist famous forever, bringing it to audiences worldwide. Martin Scorsese's film is a masterpiece of American cinema, and the Lufthansa sequence and its aftermath are the dramatic heart of the film. Robert De Niro's showing of Jimmy Conway Burke is chilling in its understated threat. Ray Liotta's voiceover narration gives us the insider view that makes the story so compelling. But behind the drama and the cinema and the entertainment is reality. Real people died, real families grieved, real trauma was caused. The Lufthansa heist was not just a story. It was a series of actual crimes that destroyed actual lives. So what do we take away from all this? We learned that crime does not pay. But not in the simple way of after-school specials. Crime can pay temporarily. Burke stole $6 million. That is real money that could have given comfortable lives for everyone involved. But the price crime takes is not just legal. It is moral, psychological, and existing. Burke killed 11 people at least and died in prison. Was the money worth it? Obviously not. But he did not know that when he planned the heist. He thought he could control the aftermath. He was wrong. We learned that loyalty in the criminal world is conditional at best and non-existent at worst. Burke had known some of these men for decades. They had worked together, drank together, committed crimes together. None of it mattered when Burke decided they were weak spots. He killed them as casually as you throw away trash. The romance of mob loyalty is fiction. The reality is cruel practicality. We learned that cooperation with law enforcement, while hated in criminal culture, is often the only path to survival. Henry Hill was called a rat, a snitch, a turncoat. But he is the one who lived. Everyone who stayed loyal to Burke ended up dead or in prison. Hill's betrayal was actually self-preservation. In a world where your boss is planning to murder you, talking to the FBI is not betrayal, it is survival. We learned that large-scale crimes involving multiple people inevitably collapse under the weight of human error. Someone talks too much, someone spends too obviously. Someone forgets to get rid of evidence, someone gets arrested and faces pressure to cooperate. The more people involved, the more chances for mistakes. Burke's operation was well planned. But it depended on every person being smart, disciplined, and loyal. That is asking too much of human nature. We learned that the FBI and law enforcement, despite setbacks and frustrations, eventually solve most major crimes. It might take years or even decades, but they keep investigating. Keep following leads, keep building cases. The Lufthansa investigation continued for over a decade before Burke went to prison. Asaro was not arrested until 2014, 36 years after the heist. But the investigation never truly stopped, most importantly. We learned that the fantasy of the big score that will solve all problems and give lifelong wealth is exactly that. A fantasy for every criminal who successfully steals a fortune and disappears to live comfortably. There are hundreds who die or go to prison. The odds are terrible, the risks are huge. And even when the crime succeeds, as Lufthansa did, the aftermath can destroy everything. $6 million stolen. 11 people died, dozens of lives ruined. 45 years of investigation, prosecution, and cultural fascination. And at the end of it all, what remains? A cautionary tale. A reminder that easy money is never easy. A story that continues to fascinate because it shows the truth about crime that we rarely see so clearly. Even when you win, the Lufthansa heist was the perfect crime that destroyed everyone. The planning was careful, the doing was perfect. The immediate result was amazing success, but the aftermath was apocalyptic. Nearly everyone died or went to prison, the money vanished. The mastermind died bitter and alone behind bars in the end. The only winners were the FBI agents who closed the case, the prosecutors who got findings of guilt, and the storytellers who turned the tragedy into entertainment. For everyone actually involved, the Lufthansa heist was a disaster. The worst decision they ever made. The crime that ended their lives. So here is my final thought. If someone ever approaches you with the score of a lifetime, with easy money and a foolproof plan, remember Jimmy Burke, remember Martin Krugman, remember Stax Edwards and Tommy DeSimone and all the others whose names are now just footnotes in criminal history. Remember that the Lufthansa heist was perfect right up until the moment it destroyed everyone involved. If you enjoyed this deep dive into one of history's most famous heists, subscribe to this channel for more true crime and gangster history stories. Give this video a like if you found it fascinating. Share it with friends who appreciate well-researched true crime content, and let me know in the comments. What story should I cover next? What gangster, heist, or crime group would you like to hear about? Thank you for watching, and remember, the perfect crime is the one you never commit. Good night.